What I'm going to do is, and what is something that's critical with the clouser, and you'll see this a lot of times if you go in and look at clousers that are tied by Umpqua or are showing up in a fly shop bin. Typically the eyes on those flies are mounted too far forward, okay? When Bob ties the flies, and I've seen a couple of his videos, he talks about the fact that really the eye should be a quarter to a third of the way back down the shank. It shouldn't be right up behind the eye. And you're going to be able to tell right away if you tied it too far forward, because when you go to tie in the first piece of material, you're going to have a heck of a time doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in about a third of the way back, and I'm going to tie my thread in right there, and I'm immediately going to make a bump of thread. And yeah, if you guys want to come up, there's no screen tonight, so we'll so I've gone in and I've created this bump right here. And then what I'm doing is I'm taking the barbell and I'm just sliding it right back against that bump. And I'm going to make about 3 turns that way. And then I'm going to make about 3 turns the other way. Okay? And by doing that, that'll help center the eyes across the hook. Then what I'm going to do, those turns help keep everything centered, but they really don't lock the fly or the eyes in. The way to get the eyes to lock is you go over the top, under the eye, and then bring it back up and over the top of the shank again. So you're really creating like a yoke around that eye. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring the thread around in front again. Everybody got me so far?
That first part was kind of a figure 8, would you say?
Right. Yeah, or an X wrap or figure 8, whatever you want to call it. And then I've heard the other one called a saddle wrap or a yoke wrap. There's different names for it. Now what
we did that with parachute.
Somewhat similar, but okay. So now what I've done is the tail on this is a material called Supreme Hair, and it starts out in a length about this long. So what I did was I grabbed about probably 7 or 8 strands of it, and then I folded it in half, cut it, folded it in half, and cut it again for this size hook. This is a size 4 hook. What I'm looking for on the length of this is I want the overall length of this tail to be about 2 times the total length of the hook, maybe just a shade more. So I'm going to go ahead and eyeball that. Trim that down a little bit. And what you have to do is to get that tie in, because of the eyes there, I'm going to take one very loose turn as kind of a capture loop. And then as I come around the other side, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cinch that down. And before I cinch it too tight, using my finger, my index finger and my thumb, I'm just going to kind of draw it back a little bit to make sure that it doesn't get caught up too close to the hook eye. Okay? So now I've got that sitting right there. Ideally, you don't want to take more than 2 to 3 turns of thread to do that.
So you're right behind the eye?
I'm right in front of the eye right now. Okay? That little trick right there is going to take you some practice. I'll give you some heads up on that. Once you've got those 2 to 3 turns and the hook eye is clear of any strands, then you come behind the hook eye, and what I'm doing is I'm pinching and holding this tail slightly up so that as I wind back, I'm actually making sure that all of this stays up on top of the hook, and I'm going to wind back to the end of the shank. I don't want to wind down onto the bend. I want it to stop right there. The other thing I should tell you is after I cut the things to length, I didn't leave it in a paintbrush type thing. I pulled some of the strands out to give it a little bit of a taper. All right. This next step is something that I've kind of an adaptation that I've done for fishing the bay, because the because the fly or the fish here, the spotties and stuff, tend to be a little bit toothy, and they like fat flash. I've taken about 3 strands of chartreuse crystal flash. I wrapped it around the thread, so it basically folded it around the thread and then tied that in, and now I'm going to bring that thread back forward, and I'm going to bring it in front of the eye. Then I'm going to take the crystal flash, and I'm going to use it like a floss. And I'm just going to put a bunch of turns in here, and it doesn't have to be perfect. If you have a little bit of the white peeking through, in fact, actually, if you wanted to use chartreuse thread just so that you couldn't even see if there were anything there, you could do that. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring that underneath, tie that off. And then trim it away. If you had enough of this and you wanted to wrap it around the head, around the eyes, you could do that. It's not really critical. Then,
is anything critical for those bay bass?
Not really. Really, the only critical thing is that they hold together. For durability, because the spotties will bite into this stuff, and if you don't have it secured, then as they start to bite into this, this will all unravel, which also sometimes doesn't even matter.
Now he's showing off his solar reds.
Yeah.
Yes, he is.
I just drew a bead across the top and the bottom, and I'll give it about 8 seconds on either side. Okay. Now, if you wanted to, and you wanted to take the time to really go in and brush and make sure you go all the way around, you could probably do that. But the worst that's going to happen with this is the little side pieces. If they were able to bite in on the side of it, then what would happen is you just have little irregular things that would be catching more light and creating more flash. So I kind of like doing it this way. So the next thing I'm going to do, now that I've got that all done, is I'm going to turn the fly over. I will tell you too, if you were going to go into sort of a production mode and you were going to try to tie like a dozen of these, what I would do is I would do a dozen to this point. You know, just stop, because you can get in a real routine and you could knock these things out real fast, then go back and put the wing on it, and that would help things go along. So now what I've got is I've got probably about 10 to 12 strands of crystal flash. And again, this is just chartreuse crystal flash.
That's the same as you wrap the body with?
Yep. And this time I'm just folding it once to double up the volume on it. And I'm going to measure this out so that it comes just either the same length or slightly longer than the Supreme here that you used for the tail. And then I'm going to cut that to an end. And using that same loose capture turn that I did on the Supreme here, I'm going to do the same thing here. Okay, 2 to 3 turns. Keep it minimal because it's real easy to let the head get really too bulked up here. All right, and for now we can just let that sit. Facing up like that, it's not going to bother anything. We'll put it down into position after we finish the fly. So now I'm going to take, and this is the original pattern on this calls for bucktail for both the tail material and the wing material. And bucktail works really, really well. It's got great movement in the water. It's a great material to work with. However, spotties and other fish out there, especially saltwater fish that are toothy, chew the snot out of bucktail, and you're lucky if you get more than 4 to 5 fish. With one of these, you can get 20 to 25 fish out of it before it's mangled to the point where you really have to switch out. So again, the top part, I want to have it be about the same length as the crystal flash. So I'm going to measure that off.
What's that material?
This one is called kinky fiber, but almost any synthetic on this will work well. And so I'm going to go right in on top of where I tied in the crystal flash. Another loose capture turn. And now I can go ahead and start making turns in next to each other and start to put in a little bit more thread pressure and start to build that head shape the way that I want it to be. And essentially what I'm looking for is just something where I've covered up all of the loose ends.
And you tied that in front of the eye?
Yes, everything now is in front of the eye. Okay. And so I'm just looking for even coverage. Then I'm going to bring it back right behind the hook eye, because it's the easiest place on this to go ahead and throw in 3 or 4 quick whip finishes. Okay. So right now you may be saying to yourself, couldn't I have tied this with chartreuse and then you'd have a chartreuse head? Yeah, you could. And in fact, even if you tied it with white, but decided you didn't like the look of it. Somebody was asking about why flat wax nylon is called flat wax nylon, and this is why. Because if you let that sit, okay, right now the thread is twisted, so it's fairly uniform, but you'll see that's going to start to untwist. If you keep letting that spin and you do it gently, you'll find that it'll get to a point where it stops, and now that thread is actually going to lay perfectly flat. All of the strands are going to lay flat on whatever you wrapped in front of it. So you're basically painting either the hook shank or whatever is right under it, and you can get a very smooth, even coverage. Okay. And again,
You got all this solar res on all your stuff, Jeff?
for most stuff that I use a cement for now, yeah.
But epoxy, no epoxy heads. You got to build
Yeah,
solar res.
yeah, and I think I still have some epoxy. Whoops, I think I still have some epoxy at home somewhere, but I couldn't tell you where it is right now. Yeah, for any epoxy related stuff, yeah, I'm using Solarez for. And hey, Mike.
Guys are studying too hard, man.
Serious here.
There's no more room.
In the middle,
Yeah.
in the middle there's room.
Kev just pulled up.
Okay, we'll
Right here. You can slide one in right here.
yeah.
Right here.
Okay, and then once you take it out of the vise, then you can go ahead and lay that down. And this fly is going to ride inverted.